everyone, it's Ajanette, and I am here to go over your Chapter 1 lecture with you. And so I'm just going to highlight some of the main ideas from the lecture. The first part of your chapter is kind of going through the history of psychology and some important contributors, William Wundt and Edward Titchener, kind of some of the overall views, functionalism, and well, actually, let me go back. We started with introspection, went through structuralism. William James presented this notion of functionalism, and then Sigmund Freud introduced the concept of psychoanalysis. Behaviorism is a really important perspective, and here's some of our behaviorists. And they actually came out in the early 1900s, followed by some of our more contemporary perspectives of the humanistic perspective. So just a really good background. Additionally, some of the other views are cognitive, biopsych, evolutionary, sociocultural, and just a nice little chart to help you understand the kind of main differences and who the primary contributing individuals were to that psychological perspective. So a really great chart to just kind of summarize it all. Additionally, we get into some of the major debates, nature versus nurture, where nurturists argue that pretty much you learn everything from your environment, and so behavior is pretty much influenced predominantly by the environment in which you're exposed to, whereas the nature side of the argument is really focusing on that natural biological contributing factor, like genes and what you inherit, and kind of your biological predisposition. So historically, we've debated that you are what you are because of nature or nurture. Now we take a much more combined approach where we know that the two influence one another. Your chapter also takes you through some of the major women and minorities in psychology that have made contributions to our profession and field, although you will find it's predominantly white males. There are very important, more from a contemporary perspective in the last 100 years, there have been some very important minority and female contributors, and most certainly now we have a very diverse field where males, females, and people of all ethnicities are contributing to the research in the field of psychology. So what I'm going to focus on is the research component. I want to set the stage for understanding psychology as a science. We are, in fact, the scientific study of human behavior and mental processes, and that's really important. Because we are a science, we do rely on empirical evidence, which is something that you gain through observation and scientific methodology or experimentation. We do utilize critical thinking to analyze that research and basically draw evidence and support for any particular hypotheses or theories that we might have. So it is, in fact, a science and not a pseudoscience. A lot of people think I'm reading their minds or I'm psychoanalyzing them when they find out I'm a psychology person. And I'm really not. I'd have to rely on much more objective and kind of boring forms because I am a scientist. So I want more data collection to draw my conclusions about circumstances. It's not about a feeling or an intuition that I can't submit to scientific research. So we do adhere to the same scientific method that you've probably been exposed to since 3rd or 4th grade. That starts with a literature review where we pull empirical studies on any given topic. We find out what's already been studied, what do we already know about those. Based upon that, we have a hypothesis for our research question, how we would predict the study to go based upon the literature review and what we already know. We're going to design our study, sometimes replicating an existing study that's been done, sometimes modifying an existing study that's been done, sometimes making a tweak on it or designing our own study in order to get at our particular research question. We're going to collect that data and analyze those results according to the statistical methodologies that we have available to us. And we're going to objectively analyze our results and assess whether or not our predictions were accurate based on whether those analyses show statistical significance or not. Then we're going to produce our paper in a method that will allow us to potentially submit for publication in a scientific journal. So we're going to write an empirical study, and it's going to be outlined with enough detail to allow for replication of our study. And that empirical article may then later on be pulled towards someone else's literature review, and the cycle starts all over again. If we have enough replication and enough results supporting one another, that may actually give rise to a theory. We accept it as kind of a consistent truth, and we want to understand or explain the underlying rationale behind those results. So again, that scientific method is kind of circular, where we start with our literature review, go through our study, present our hypothesis, design a study to test that hypothesis, collect the data and analyze that data to see if our hypothesis was accurate or not, publish those results in an empirical article, and then we might develop a particular theory that's going to give rise to that continuation of that scientific method. Overall, we have about 4 general goals of psychology. First, we want to kind of describe behavior that's occurring. That might include naming, describing underlying characteristics, classifying, detailing the circumstances under which behavior occurs. We might try to explain behavior in terms of what are the causes of it, why is it occurring, when is it occurring, what are the related factors and under which it's occurring. We might want to try to predict behavior if we know that 2 behaviors are directly correlated, such as attendance and your performance in the class. Then we might be able to predict your performance based on your attendance levels. So once we've established those very clear relationships between variables or things that can vary between person to person, then we can use those variables to predict other variables that are related. And then finally, we may want to change behavior, which ultimately that's probably the end goal of psychology, where once we've identified a pathological behavior, the reasons for that behavior, and the related factors that might contribute to that behavior, we may want to influence a factor to change the behavior in a positive way. So we ultimately want to influence positive behavior. Research can also be basic versus applied. And basic research, it pretty much has a pure intention of just gathering some basic knowledge just to expand our understanding of any given topic. Applied research is actually applied in a specific setting. So it's more direct research where we want to see if our method or approach is effective in the field. So I might have a basic understanding of how people learn, but then I want to try to apply that in a classroom, and I want to see if maybe an active learning strategy is more effective than a passive learning strategy. So this is trying to change the behavior or see if my attempts to change the behavior are accurate. Ethics have been a very important topic over the history of psychology. We've had some really important studies that have been done, such as our little Albert guy, where we wanted to see if emotions can be classically conditioned. You're going to talk more about this in chapter 6. And in fact, we did find that we can actually teach little Albert to be afraid of things that he wasn't otherwise afraid of by pairing them with things that he is naturally afraid of. And sadly, we taught this little Albert to be afraid of little white mice, and in so doing, we created a phobia in him. And some might say that was unethical. This was certainly predating our ethical guidelines. It was one of the many studies that's been done to kind of inspire us toward developing a systematic code of ethics that we have to adhere to. So in psychology, we adhere to the code of ethics governed by the APA, or American Psychological Association. It does require a very clear, informed consent, where we have to directly tell participants what the nature of the study is, what the risks to them are, and they can make an informed decision as to whether they're going to participate in our study. They should also be given the right to withdraw from the study at any time. After the study's been conducted, we have to debrief them, where we tell them if we used any deception or if we left out any information. Sometimes deception is important, like a memory study. I may not want to directly come out and tell them specifically what I'm looking at, because it might kind of artificially alter their behavior. So sometimes I do use deception, but in the debriefing, I'm required to disclose that deception. And again, this is just meant to protect them and to make them more informed about the implications of participating in our study. We also have what we call institutional review boards or institutional ethics committees that approve research for various institutions and educational institutions. So the research has to be submitted for approval before you can conduct it. That must include a copy of your informed consent and a copy of your debriefing and a description of your study and your proposed method section. So you actually do a lot of work just designing the study and the materials, submitting it for approval, and then potentially risk getting denied, or they might tell you how you could better improve upon the design just to meet that basic ethics threshold, or to ensure that we are most definitely protecting the validity of our research, and we're doing viable and valuable research moving forward. Additionally, it's really important as part of our ethics to protect participant confidentiality and patient confidentiality in therapy. So it would be unethical for me to release, if you participated in a study, it would be unethical for me to release your data. I need to keep that confidential, and I need to make sure that the information you disclose to me is private. So that's going to encourage you to be honest in your disclosure, so it's not going to in any way interfere with me drawing valid conclusions. Additionally, if I were a therapist, I need to protect your confidentiality as well. And you need to know and trust your therapist to maintain your privacy and not share your problems or concerns outside of that therapy relationship. There are 2 exceptions where I might break your confidence, and that's when I'm ethically bound by law to go to the police or report it to the proper authorities. And that's if you threaten to hurt yourself or you threaten to hurt anybody else. If you've disclosed that you're abusing a minor, I'm required to report that to CPS. If you've threatened to hurt yourself or someone else, I may be required to report that to the police, and I may be required to report that to the person that might be in danger as well. So those are important considerations as far as ethics and confidentiality. I'm actually going to stop here, come back and start a second video in order to introduce you to the various types of psychological research and explain the basic differences between those types of research. I'll be back in a minute.